Good morning and welcome to Tanya, chapter 38. Today we're learning about spiritual frequency levels like a radio station. What frequency are you on? What channel? What station are you tuned into? Over here. The question is, what channel are you tuned into? Right now, you're listening to me here on YouTube. You're listening to me on Facebook. You might be listening live. You might be listening later. But if you're not on the right Wi-Fi network, if you're not on the right YouTube channel, you're not going to be able to listen to us. And the same thing, the same principle applies when it comes to how we tune in to godliness. We also have an energy output which reaches into a certain energy level, and that depends on how we fulfill the mitzvah. Remember, the word mitzvah means a connection. And that's the meaning of the word mitzvah. It's not just a commandment, it's not just a headache, it's not just a responsibility, it's not a duty. A mitzvah means a connection. But what are you connecting with? Which channel of Hashem are you connecting with? Just like when you talk to your spouse. What degree of your spouse are you connecting with? And we all know that there's different levels of connecting with our spouses or with our children. You could have spent the day together, but not really had any meaningful conversation. You could have had meaningful conversation, but not have had any emotional connection. You may remember that I've spoken about this before. We have 5 soul levels, generally speaking: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. And they correspond to action, emotion, intellect, transcendence, and essence. We're most frequently in contact with the lower 3, action, emotion, and intellect, nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is why we daven 3 times a day, every day of the year. On special days, we reach a little higher into our souls, into transcendence, and that's why we have a 4th prayer called Musaf. And only once a year, we reach the very essence of our souls, and that's on Yom Kippur, which is why Yom Kippur has the 5th prayer of Ne'ilah, because we bore into the 5th essence of our soul. So when you're speaking to your spouse, what kind of relationship do you have with your spouse? Where do you normally hang out with your spouse? On the level of emotion? Or is your relationship one purely of action? Are you just one that share a bank account or share a kitchen, share a bedroom? Or is it more about an emotional connection, maybe an intellectual connection, a transcendent one? Or is it an essence connection? And that is what we're learning today in Tanya chapter 38 as we wrap up this chapter. I'd like to welcome Marty from Gardens, Rob and Harvey from Chicago. Wonderful to see you all. Chag Sameach. And Elaine from Ibis. And anybody else who might be with us here live or later, shalom, and welcome to today's Tanya Torah study. Pleasure to see you all. So when we learn about frequencies, here's what we learned about today. We spoke about the fact that in the earlier parts of this chapter, we spoke about the fact that we draw down the body of God through our action. But we draw down the soul of God through our intent, what we call kavanah. The body of our action, everything in this world has a body and a soul. Think about it. Everything has an external and an internal, has a superficial and a substance, has a body and a soul. When you think about it, there's your body and there's your soul. There's your there's your house, which is the body of your house. And then there's your home, which is the soul of your house. There's your family, and then there's the intimacy of your connection. Hashem too has an external and an internal. The action like begets like. So when we do a physical action void of intent, void of soul, we're only drawing down God's external components, so to speak. But when we do a mitzvah with kavanah, with intent, with concentration, with mindfulness, if we can do a mitzvah with mindfulness, it's then that we draw down not only God's external and superficial components, but also God's soul, God's neshama, God's internal hidden components. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, how various levels of our intent are able to draw down varying levels of God's inner components all the way through to his essence. Good morning, Dean. So far, so good. I hope you guys are okay with this idea so far. If you have any questions, if you do, please let me know. We mentioned that a mitzvah, this is from the Zohar, from the Kabbalah, that a mitzvah, the Alter Rebbe says, without intent is like a body without a soul. It's a very important metaphor there. A mitzvah without intent is like a body without a soul. Because there are varying levels of godliness in this world. Let's say an example that the Alter Rebbe brought, where from the four strata of creation, there's the inanimate kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. Each one of them has a different degree of godliness in it, a different degree of godly energy. Think of the inanimate that has no apparent life in it. It seems to just be, versus the vegetable kingdom that certainly displays life and vitality, but on a limited plane, far more limited than the vitality that is displayed within the animal kingdom, which the animal kingdom shows much more life and vitality than the vegetable kingdom. I mean, the vegetable kingdom grows, but it doesn't move. And just like the difference between the life within inanimate is the difference between mitzvahs performed without kavana, without mindfulness, and those performed with mindfulness. So with regard to the connection to Hashem, drawn through our mitzvah, kavana is the key. In previous chapters, we were talking about making an impact on this world. And when it comes to making an impact on this world, we don't really care about the frequency, about the intensity of the light. We care about the destination. We care about this physical world, which is why the mitzvah needs to be done with a physical action. And that's what we spoke about extensively in previous chapters, that the mitzvah needs to be performed with physical action as opposed to merely abstract thought, so that it has a physical impact on this world. But today we're learning in chapter 38 about what are you drawing down to this physical world? What frequency of godliness are you bringing down? An inanimate level of godliness, a vegetable level of godliness, or maybe an animal level of godliness, or perhaps even a human level of godliness? Is your mitzvah, let me ask you this question, friends. The mitzvah that you performed today, the tefillin that you laid this morning, was that tefillin performed on the level of inanimate, vegetable, animal, or human? What degree of divine vitality was present? What degree of mindfulness was present in the concentration of your mitzvah this morning? Okay. And what we're going to do now is take a look at this idea inside, because the way the Alter Rebbe explains this idea is that there's actually, generally speaking, the divine energy in the soul can be split into the four levels of creation: inanimate, vegetable, animal, and human, and which correspond, by the way, to the four letters of the name of God, the tetragrammaton, the yud and the hey, and the vav and the hey. So the yud relates to inanimate, the hey relates to vegetable kingdom, the vav relates to the animal kingdom, and the final hey relates to the human kingdom. When you do a mitzvah in action only, without any intent whatsoever, that is on the level of the inanimate. It's got very little apparent godliness in it. You've built a house for God, but you've not built a home for God in that physical object. You've drawn the body of God. Again, this is anthropomorphically speaking, the external component of God's presence, but not the internal component of God's presence. Because if you did it only in action, mindlessly, you've only drawn down. It's good, but it's not. It's a very low level frequency of godliness, low level energy of godliness that you've attracted. Now, if you've done the mitzvah with action and speech, but there was some thought in it. If there was some thought in it, then it's on the level of the vegetable kingdom. Now, if beyond the thought, which is the awareness of what you were doing, you actually had an emotion in there, then you've progressed. If there was a feeling, if you actually felt, not just thinking, but there was actually a feeling. Remember, we learned in Tanya chapter 3 that our mind controls our heart. The brain, the mind, flows into an emotion. That's Chabad, Chachma bin Adas, which is idea, understanding, and feeling. The difference, the transfer from comprehension, idea, understanding, and realization. The difference between understanding and realization is that in understanding, you understand in your mind, but in realization, in Das, you're now feeling in your heart what you formerly understood in your brain. So if you've evolved your understanding, evolved your meditation from merely being aware into an emotion, then there could be two kinds of emotion. If it's an emotion which is instinctive, an emotion, a love which is hidden, a natural love that we all have within us, as we've learned earlier in Tanya in chapters 18 to 25. We learned that there's a natural love that every single Jew has for God. And you can actually activate that love at any time. That natural love that we have for God is our inability to be separate from God. When we realize that every mitzvah connects us with God and every sin severs our connection from God entirely, in much the same way that you would never allow yourself to worship an idol. You'd rather be killed rather than worship an idol. So too, the natural love prevents us from committing any sin. We've learned about this in great detail in chapters 18 through 25. If the emotion that you've managed to sire within yourself is only a natural love and instinctive emotion, then you're on the level of animal, on the energy level of animal. Now let's not put that down. The energy level within the animal is significant. It is certainly significant. An animal is far more alive, visibly alive, than a vegetable, and certainly more than an inanimate object. But if you're able to truly master your emotion, if you're truly able to be human, as we've learned in the earlier chapters of Tanya, from chapter 9 through 17, where you were able to truly take advantage of your soul toolbox, which was that your mind naturally controls and dominates and directs your heart, to the point that your focused, your mindful meditation actually can give birth and does give birth to true emotions, even if they're not full-blown emotions. We learned in chapter 15 where we spoke about an intellectual emotion, an attraction towards a certain emotion, even if it's not a full-blown emotion. That is what's called mayach shalit al alev, where the mind rules over the heart. If now you've mastered an emotion where you truly love God, where your meditation has nurtured a love for God and other kinds of emotions which are motivating the action of the mitzvah, now you've reached the frequency of medaber, of the human kingdom, which is the highest of the four options of soul connections. Let's take a look at this idea within the words of the Tanya, where we learn about soul frequencies and our ability to draw down godliness into this world. So again, we're not focusing on the destination right now. We're not focusing on the physical world, which is where we're bringing godliness to. In chapter 38, it's all about frequencies, which is about what channel are you bringing in, a very distracted, like a very fuzzy radio channel, or a very clear radio channel? Is it a strong Wi-Fi signal or a weak Wi-Fi signal? What kind of internet do you have, right? And that is what we're talking about in Tanya chapter 38, which is what degree of godliness are you drawing into your mitzvah, and therefore how much of what quality of a home are you building for God with your mitzvah? We spoke that generally speaking, the purpose of the mitzvahs is to build a home for God in this world. But what quality of home have you built? Have you built a paper house? Or have you built a house built out of solid rock and hurricane windows? The quality of the home that you've built for God through your mitzvah has everything to do with the quality of your kavana, of your concentration in prayer, in the mitzvah. So let's take a look at this idea. I'm going to read today from the Practical Tanya. I think many of you have this book, the Practical Tanya, on page 445. Levels of action and intent, middle of the page. Above, we've suggested that of the four categories, inanimate objects, plants, animals, and humans, the lower two non-movers, inanimate and plants, correspond to the body since they show no overt signs of life. And the upper two movers, animals and humans, correspond to the soul. Based on this, Tanya will now discern two levels in the physical act of the mitzvahs, the body, corresponding to inactive objects and plants, and two levels in kavana, the soul of the mitzvahs, corresponding to humans and animals. And the degree of illumination in the mitzvahs is also divided into four levels, two in the mitzvah act and two in the intent, in the kavana. For in the body of the mitzvahs themselves and the action of the mitzvahs, there are two levels which are corresponding to the category of inactive objects, the purely practical mitzvahs, which involve actual physical object. That's the lowest level where there's only action. And two, a higher level of action corresponding to the plant kingdom, the mitzvahs observed through the combination of speech and thought. And the mitzvah acts are on the level and character of vessels, which is a property of tzimtzum, diminishment. Okay, I'm going to skip that little part of there. Okay. I'm going to skip now to 447. This is why I get a little confused, friends, with using the two various Tanyas. The Practical Tanya here and the straight translation of the Tanya here. I always find that I prefer the straight translation of Tanya because the commentary sometimes gets a little too much. It's hard enough to focus and understand what the Tanya is actually saying. So when we have to get into the commentaries, sometimes I find that distracting. But let's try to continue in the Practical Tanya to see if we can finish it up in the Practical Tanya. So on 447, the higher level of the action mitzvahs, we said, is when you do a mitzvah not only in action but in speech and thought. This corresponds to the vegetable kingdom, such as Torah study, recital of the Shema, prayer, grace after meals, and other blessings, which while having a physical component, speech, also have a more spiritual component, thought, like plants, which are generally motionless, physical, do show signs of life, spiritual. But now there's two levels in the kavanah, in the meditation, which correspond to animal and human kingdom. And the kavanah of the mitzvah is to connect to God, which is like the soul of a mitzvah, which when compared to the mitzvah act, its body. This kavanah is also subdivided into two levels, corresponding to the two types of souls found in physical bodies, namely the souls found in animals and in humans. Right? Let's talk about the soul, the level within the human. For if your mental disposition is good, to think about God, to contemplate His greatness, so that your powers of bina, cognition, give rise to high reverence in your mind and a love of God in your heart's right chamber. In other words, you're able to give birth to full-blown emotion towards God, so that your soul thirsts to God, to connect to Him. Through observing Torah mitzvahs, which pull the blessed infinite light to illuminate your soul, so as to connect with God. And it's with this intention that you study Torah and you observe mitzvahs, with this emotion that you created a full-blown emotion as a result of your meditation. And it is with this intention that you pray and recite blessings. Then this level of kavanah can be compared to the highest of the four categories, human, since a human has intellect, free choice, and speaks intelligently. And you've engaged these higher, uniquely human qualities in your kavanah. This is level 4. But now we turn to level 3, a lower level of kavanah based on the discussions in Tanya from chapters 17 through 25, corresponding to the instinctual properties of an animal. As for someone who is weak in his ability to think about God and to contemplate the greatness of the Blessed Infinite One, and his powers of bina, cognition, won't give rise to a palpable love, a full-blown emotion of God in his heart, nor a reverence of God in his mind, nor a fear of God in his heart. And all he can do is recall and awaken the natural latent love in his heart and bring that love out of its hidden latent state, as we've learned earlier in Tanya. so that even if it can't inspire his heart to palpable emotion, it's at least conscious in his mind, so that the will of his mind and the hidden places of his heart are in full and absolute agreement with complete authenticity to actually give up his life to affirm God's unity if put to the test. The natural love will motivate you to die rather than to sever your connection from God. And this theoretical willingness to give up his life is seriously contemplated so as to have enthusiasm to attach to God, his divine soul and its garments. In other words, his realization that he would theoretically give up his life for God powers his action that gives enthusiasm to every one of the mitzvahs, because he realizes that every mitzvah is a connection with God and every sin is a severance from God. So in much the same passion that I would be willing to die for God rather than worship idols, with the same enthusiasm, he avoids any sin and engages in any mitzvah with the hidden love, the natural love that we all have inherited from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this theoretical willingness to give up his life is seriously contemplated so as to have enthusiasm to attach to God, his divine soul and its garments, so that they can be absorbed in God's unity and oneness, which is the divine will expressed through Torah study and mitzvah observance, as explained above in chapters 23 and 35. And as we've learned, within this latent love is also included fear. To accept God's authority and not to rebel against him, God forbid. In other words, if the observance of the mitzvah is motivated not by your full-blown emotion, but by your natural love, and with all this above kavanah, he turns away from God, turns away from evil, and does good, to study, to pray, and recite blessings, not with a full-blown emotion, but with a natural love. But since he's unable to arouse emotion for God, he contemplates only the translation of the words without any palpable fear or love in his heart or mind. This level of intent could be compared to the soul of an animal that has no substantive intellect or free choice. And all of its emotions, which are the fear of things it deems harmful and the love of things it deems enjoyable, are merely innate to it. The animal's instinctive, and your love is instinctive too. Not to diminish, it's quite a significant level. If we could all live at this level, I think we'd be okay. Most of us are living with the lights off. Most of us are living mindlessly. If we could at least live on the level of the animal kingdom, where we're experiencing innate natural love and fear of God, we at least would be conscious. Not fully conscious, but we'd be conscious. So like an animal which fears the things it deems harmful and the love of things it deems enjoyable instinctively are merely innate to it, instinctive, and not the result of its cognition or thought. This is analogous to the natural latent love and fear in the heart of all of Israel, which are inheritance from our patriarchs, similar to the natural instinct of our souls, as mentioned above in chapters 18 and 19. So this, friends, is the conclusion of chapter 38, where we've learned today that when you're building a home for God, it's very important to be cognizant of the quality of the home that you're building, the degree of godliness that you're bringing into your home, into this home for God. What invitation, what energy of godliness are you inviting? Energy meets energy, like meets like. And if your relationship with God is one that is instinctive, you're drawing down an instinctive reciprocal energy from God, which is on the level of an animal, like it's instinctive. But if yours is totally mindful, where your mind has controlled your emotion, then you're drawing down the highest level, which is the human level. The energy, which is the godly energy, which is inside of a human. And that's what we were born for. We were born to draw down that kind of godly energy to this world because we're human. If we were just a vegetable, we would be okay to bring down a vegetative level of godliness. But since we were made to be human, we can do this. It's a matter of meditation. And as we've learned earlier in Tanya, if you can just meditate upon godly truths, take a chapter of Tanya and meditate upon it. If there's been a chapter of Tanya that has inspired you, then meditate upon it to the point that you can start to feel something. And when you nurture that emotion, you now will become cognizant, fully present, and alive. Instead of living your life like a pedestrian, passing by life's experiences, you'll be fully immersed in them because your emotions will be on. You'll be aware and you'll be conscious. Tanya says that we can do this. Tanya lifts us up higher, and calls upon us to fulfill our full potential. Let's do what we were born to do, which is to build a home for God in this world by doing mitzvahs, as many mitzvahs as possible, and they should be action mitzvahs. But those action mitzvahs that we do for God, to build for God a house in this world, need to also have emotion, so that we can build not only a house for God, but a home for God, drawing the inner component of godliness, the divine energy, the inner energy, the highest quality of energy for God in this world. And that is how we fulfill our purpose in this world. It's about doing mitzvahs mindfully, friends. It's about meditating on the greatness of God, creating an emotion within your heart towards God. Just like you love your spouse, or you love your children, or you love your parents, you can love your God because we come from God. And God has been so good to us. And if you meditate upon what God has done for you, and that, by the way, is the meaning of the words of davening. If you think about it, the words of davening is all about this idea. Think about it. I'll open a random page of the Siddur. Page 33 in the Siddur. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, O my soul. I will sing to the Lord with my soul. I will chant praises to my God with my entire being. Do not place your trust in munificent benefactors and mortal man, for he doesn't have the ability to bring deliverance. When his spirit departs, he returns to his earth. If you trust in a human being, if you trust in your boss or in your benefactor, then you're trusting in a mortal. On that very day, his plans become naught. Fortunate is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope rests upon the Lord his God. He makes the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. He keeps his promise faithfully forever. He renders justice to the oppressed. If you just read the Psalm of David, that already is very inspiring. Think about the fact that God will never, ever let me down and has never let me down. That meditation right there is enough to sire an emotion within yourself, to make you conscious, to be able to allow you to fulfill your purpose in this world, to build for God a house, a home in this world. Let's do it, friends. Chazak, God bless you. Don't forget, tomorrow night is Wednesday night, where we're having a sukkah drive-through. Please make your reservation so we can know that everyone's not coming all at the same time, from 5 to 7 p.m. tomorrow night at right in front of the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens. Just make your reservations online at jewishgardens.com/RSVP. That's jewishgardens.com/RSVP. There's no charge for this event. You can just drive through and fulfill all the mitzvahs of Sukkot. The sukkah, the lulav, the etrog, the food, all the blessings. You can do them all in one drive-through opportunity tomorrow night. Just register your spot at jewishgardens.com/RSVP. Please share this with your friends. Invite them. Let them know that they have a space, that they're part of the Jewish people. And even though they might not yet be members of the community, they're still part of our people. We care about them and we have a space for them. None of us are complete unless all of us are included. Let's bring them all together. Share this with your friends, the friends that are down here, even if you're not. Share with your friends, your family, your neighbors. Let them know that they're invited to join us, and let them experience the mitzvahs of Sukkot, as we all were called to do, not only, and make sure that it's an action mitzvah to make for God a home in this physical world through the lulav and the etrog and the wine and whatever else you're going to be given at the Sukkah event. And hopefully they can do so mindfully, being aware that I'm doing this for the God that loves me, that cares for me, the God that has been so good to me, and arousing those same emotions within yourself to make yourself conscious and cognizant and aware, to draw down the highest quality levels of godly frequency. Let's tune into the right station and draw down the right degree of godliness. Thank you for joining me here this morning. Shalom, friends, and have a wonderful day. I believe Corey's having a class today at 11:30 on Zoom. That's jewishgardens.com/Zoom at 11:30, Hebrew language through King David's Psalms. See you later. Shalom, and have a wonderful day.